Awesome. Welcome to the next episode of Leading in the Moment. I'm Dana Durazio with National League of Cities, and I am so excited to have Lindsey Kugel here with me. Lindsey is the executive director of the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. They do this amazing, brilliant, worldwide work in emotional intelligence and mindfulness-based leadership development. And they are focused on the population that's serving in the health sector, nonprofit, civil servants, and really around thinking about supporting decision-making, wise systems change and decision-making. So I'm so excited to have Lindsey here. I've trained in SIYLI, short for the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, in case you hear us say SIYLI. And I'm just really excited to welcome you. So welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Awesome. And so I know today we just want to learn more about you and how you came about mindfulness. We want to learn about SIYLI and what this might mean for our leaders. So I just want to dive right in. So my first question is, tell us a little bit about mindfulness. How did this get on the radar for you?
For me personally, yeah. So when I was a teenager, I was exposed first to meditation through my mom. So I learned about what meditation was, and had some of the classic, maybe even some of the classic misunderstandings of like, oh, you're supposed to try not to think. I was like, well, that sounds really challenging because boy, does my mind like it. But started to learn about a little bit about how you're in adolescent life, right? There's such a tumultuous emotional time. So started to learn a little bit about how mindfulness could help me work with that. But even then, it was definitely like a fits and starts kind of a practice. And then when I had my first son in utero, I actually took a class called Mindfulness-Based Childbirth and Parenting, which is like MBSR, but for childbirth and parenting. So you have like Lamaze in combination with mindfulness practice. And what was really fascinating about that was that in this moment where I was, poised to become a parent, was also a full-time working almost mom, and in graduate school. So it was a pretty intense period. And then I had this resource of meditation and mindfulness, but most of the time that I would sit down to practice, I would be frustrated with myself for not being great at stopping my thoughts. And so I would get to the end of a session and go, this is terrible. I feel terrible. And what happened for me during that course was really interesting. For whatever reason, I think maybe because of the impending parenthood and the intensity of the time, I had a session where I sat in meditation and was like, what if I just say that showing up is all that's needed? What if it's just showing up, and in a way incorporating a sense of forgiveness for myself for not being good at meditation? And that was the first time in years where I had a sitting meditation session that ended in joy. And I was like, oh, I see what this can be. And that was a real moment in shift. And it was only 6 months later I joined SIYLI, actually.
Wow. Oh my goodness. And then just steeped in it, right? Just because this is a bulk of your work. But I want to pause before I move on and ask you another question and just hold some space and reflect back this idea of showing up in the practice, because I know we do have some leaders who do practice with us. If you don't know about our weekly practice, there's going to be a link in the article below. But oftentimes this is what we hear. Oh, wait, but I have to stop thinking, or I didn't do it well. I'm not good at it. And I just really want to share appreciation and reflect and highlight this. It's the showing up and making time for yourself and supporting yourself in that way. So thank you for saying that out loud.
Yeah, I felt suddenly it was like this just moment. It was like something clicked. And after practicing meditation again on and off for 10 years or something before that. And then suddenly my whole relationship to it was different. And so, yeah, just giving like the credit for just showing up was the big insight there. Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing. And so I would love for you to share with us a little bit about, so, and then you landed at SIYLI, or Search Inside Yourself.
Mhm.
And so I would love, as I shared, I have gotten to train in your model. I think it's brilliant. We have used it in some of our departments at the National League of Cities as well. So we are big proponents of thinking about mindfulness and leadership development. So tell us, what is SIYLI?
Yeah. So the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, as you mentioned, so we were founded in 2012, but the kind of advent of the whole model and program came about at Google in 2007, when Chang Tan, a Googler at the time, and several of his colleagues and other folks outside of Google who were both neuroscientists and meditation practitioners came together and built a course that's around emotional intelligence underpinned at every step by mindfulness practice. So how do we, right? So there's a sort of a thinking of like, oh, either you've got emotional intelligence or you don't, right? But the idea was, hey, if we are practicing with mindfulness, which is effectively cultivating a sense of attention in a particular direction, right? So if we're doing that actively, we can start to build the self-awareness and the self-regulation that's needed to support emotional intelligence. So that's kind of the core understanding and philosophy behind the program, which is called Search Inside Yourself. That's our initial flagship program. And SIYLI was founded in 2012 after this program had been iterated and offered to Googlers within the organization, and really was supportive. There were a lot of people whose lives it made a big difference. And I worked there for a time as I joined SIYLI, and I had a colleague who said, I'm a better programmer because of having these mindfulness practices that I employ. And so then the organization was founded as a nonprofit to take the programming out into the world because it had been so impactful within the organization of Google. And then fast forward to now, so SIYLI, which again, we do call ourselves that, just go for it. I like to wear my SIYLI hat all day long. We've been working with organizations of all kinds and sizes since that day, since 2012. And just recently, we've actually divided into two different organizations. So I am on the SIYLI side, which continues to be the nonprofit arm. There's a new organization called SIY Global, which works with the kind of corporate culture change. And that has enabled SIYLI to really direct our attention, as you mentioned, towards the public sector, right? So towards public health and healthcare, educators, and those who are really working in human service and nonprofit, right? So agents for change, or those folks who are like social workers and really engaging and connecting with community and supporting people, and a recognition that with the benefits, with the tools that mindfulness and these EI practices, we can resource ourselves for some of that really challenging work, right? We're either managing the let's say difficult emotional realities of working within the community and making sure that people have what they need, mental health wise or healthcare wise, or right, agents for change, seeing where there are systems that might need a change or something addressed. So for example, we are working on a program with a series of climate activists and environmental activists, right? So resourcing these folks who are up against, setbacks, whether it's with policies that change or, needing to release new research around species or, what have you, that they then get the resources to keep going in the face of some of those challenges that come about as a result of the work. So that's what we get to focus on now, which is really exciting for us.
That's amazing. And I'm really, I love this word, resource ourselves. And I know that, especially the audience that we're speaking to, are on the front lines trying to do all the things from just operate as a human in really uncertain times, extra uncertain times, and making pivots at a lot, which is daunting. Engaging with others and trying to, you know, in a leadership role, you're also trying to help support and manage and move to decision or move to solution others. And that's a lot. And so I think that really resonates with our audience of this need to resource ourselves. And could you maybe even share a little more specifically, like, what are you seeing maybe even is what leaders are sharing that this is supporting them in? And I know there's some like key phrases that I've seen SIYLI using around like psychological safety and some other areas, but could we talk a little bit more about those? Because I really want our leaders to be able to understand and hear, like, here's what we're naming, and maybe you'll see yourself in this as something you want some support in.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's such an important question. And it actually, so one of the other pathways through which I came to SIYLI was that I was in the process of getting an MBA. So received my MBA, and I was in working with how you affect systems change, and particular in that case, it was around environmental change. But one of the things that we learned as we were going through this was how important it is to meet people where they are, right? So as city leaders, as county leaders, and we've actually worked with a number of counties and small governments, and what we see over and over again is just number one, the sheer number of stakeholders and the wide array of interests stakeholders and partners are representing, that in order to get somewhere, in order to get anywhere, you really need to meet each individual or each group where they are and understand what are the things that are driving them, what are the things that they're interested in, what's going to be the most important thing to know as I engage with, another person or a group. And so as a leader in civil service, for example, having the skills to come into an interaction with that orientation about how do I understand what's important to you, connect with it in my own experience, and then come together from a place of how do we make those two things meet and connect our shared goals, because that's how some of the most powerful policies or deals or collaborations come about. And so I think that's one of the number one things is having this orientation toward, it's not just collaboration, although collaboration is a key element, right? This interpersonal skill set. But again, really approaching it from how can we identify, recognize, and state where we are each coming from in an interaction, and then help move our interaction toward supporting both of our end goals. And so that's a huge skill that is dramatically supported through emotional intelligence and being aware of, again, what drives people, right? What motivates us at our inner core, what values are at play for us, what identity questions are at play for us, right? I know that as leaders, we encounter this all the time of how do we navigate, the politics of being a leader, right? But what's really motivating and driving for ourselves and for others, and then knowing and operating from that place can be extremely powerful.
And I really appreciate sharing both, which is back to the emotional intelligence, right? This is research based. There's neuroscience behind this, like how I always call this hacking our brain, like how and why do we make decisions? How and why do we get stressed? What does that mean? And so I really appreciate that you've just shared that this is about resourcing ourselves in two ways, which is along the emotional intelligence framework. That self part of, I might use the word fill your tank, like take care, because if we don't know what's going on with us and what we need and have a moment to do our practice, then, or have a strategy for ourselves, we can't do the other work. It just isn't, we can try, but we can't really do the showing up part because we've got to show up for ourselves first, to use your language. And the second piece just is the once we figure out those strategies for ourselves, because it's important, then we can do all the other work, and we can start doing the perspective taking. We can do the meeting people where they're at. And because I think that really will resonate with our leaders who are trying to do just that. And it's really hard to do the first part, take care of ourselves, so that we can do the second. And so would you be willing to share so what does this, say a leader would like to come and learn a little bit more about this, what tactilely does this mean? Like, what does this look like when you're working with a leader or community? Could you share that with us?
So when you say tactilely, do you mean like, what are the things we are actually doing to play?
Yeah, give a flavor, because this might be, okay, cool. We might have some people who are saying, yes, I do know I need to take care of myself and I'm trying to figure it out, or I'm working on it. And yes, I am trying my best to nurture and lead and serve my community. So how does this play into my world?
Yeah. I mean, it's such a great question. And the funny thing about it is it's a really personal question. And so one of the things that we do in our programming is we have a lot of tools that we offer. And when I say tools, mostly I mean practices, exercises, right? So it could be sitting in silence for somewhere between 30 seconds to 15 minutes. And either having, sitting in silence with something particular that we're doing in our minds, or listening to a meditation or something like that. So that is a practice and a resource. It could mean journaling and having specific reflections that we are engaged in. And those can be, more or less directive, depending on what we feel like is going to be most supportive to us. It could be a way of orienting around a conversation. So it could be doing something just a little different in the way that we either reflect back what we're hearing in a conversation, or don't interrupt for, give ourselves a whole 5-second pause before we speak, right? And see what happens if we open up that space. 5 seconds is a long time, just to say. And if you open up that kind of space, it can be really surprising for both people what happens if there's a little bit more space in a conversation. So anyway, I'm just throwing those out. All that to say, we offer a lot of different tools that can be used, and we point to, what does the neuroscience say, and what do the business case studies say about how these are useful. And don't believe us, go out and try it in your own experience, and then see what actually works for you and see what lands. And we invite, try it out a few times, right? Don't do it once and then say like, well, that's not for me. And sometimes that might be true, but check it out a few times, use it in a few different contexts, and then see what really works. And some people, right, again, some people think that journaling is really, really useful for when they have very strong emotions, but don't use it any other time, for example. Or for me, I think one of the things that just keeps coming up is, wow, I know that I'm more balanced in the way that I approach the work that I have to do, whether it's computer work or, book work kind of stuff, versus interacting in a meeting. I'm more balanced if I get a short time of silent, focused attention practice. And on some days, what's really supportive is bringing a greater quality of my listening to whoever I'm talking to. So maybe it's just I'm using the other person as almost like the object of a focused attention practice, and see what happens again when there's that space, when I'm not busying my mind with what am I going to say next. So does that answer your question, Dana?
Yes, absolutely. And here's where I'm how to be an active and engaged listener, which can help us to connect with one another, build consensus, inspire, lead, move to decision making, work through tough scenarios. I mean, I don't think there's any of us who don't encounter difficult scenarios, or maybe I'm sure there's even difficult relationships, right, that we have to encounter to move through, move with, figure out what to do with, and the ability to maybe take a step back, be able to journal. So I just pulling out those skill sets, those things that we know we do as leaders, but we maybe don't always have the tools or the community around us to practice. And so I just wanted to lift that out from what you just shared. And also this sense of experience. It's not a one size fits all. It's not everybody does this, and this. It's not prescriptive, if you will, but this really is an authentic, if you'll let me use that word. Again, I've practiced this, so I've gotten to actually get into it, experience it. But really you can find yourself in it, what works for you. And I just wanted to share that back out in terms of it is personal. It's not, nope, you got to journal for 5 minutes. It's not that. It's not regimented in that way. It's try, test a bit. Yeah, right. Come back, reflect. How did that go? Maybe you try again. Maybe then you switch to something else, but there's room for you. And whatever it is that you might be encountering and facing, it's human, it's dynamic.
Yes, I love that. It is, yes, dynamic. Absolutely. Because the thing that works for you today might also not work for you tomorrow, right? So you get to keep playing with it. But I think you've named this already in the conversation, but taking the time, even if it's a really short amount of time, but actually creating a dedicated space and time. I was just teaching a short workshop around this morning about how do we set ourselves up for success to just like spend 1 minute, right? Like, how do we create the habit that enables us to set aside some time? Because even saying I'm going to set aside 1 minute and then setting aside 1 minute and doing it, there's just a sense of like, okay, I did it. I know I can do it. Great. And there's already a win there, which is really important to celebrate, actually, right? Celebrating the wins that we get, especially when we're practicing something like mindfulness that can look a lot like not a lot. It can look like, right? It can look like non-doing, right? Because in a way, that's what it is. We are sitting with some dedication and some intention and, allowing ourselves to not say anything, to not produce anything, right? But it's about what ground is that creating for us for the rest of our day. So just appreciating what you're calling out. And I feel I think a lot of times it's easier to make it's made more difficult than it has to be. And that's one of the things that we emphasize in our programming, in all of our programming, is micro practices, right? How do we find those moments where you can do things even in stealth when nobody has to know you're practicing mindfulness for 30 seconds, because just signaling to yourself, you're worth it. You're worth it, and your work is worth it, and both things will benefit. And then the last thing I'll say is that, and I feel like there are many times where we can't even take any credit for this. Somebody comes to the program because they're already doing practices, and I've had this happen a few times where they say, I've been practicing for a while, and people are asking me like what I'm doing. People are asking me what's different, and even changes that you might not even be aware of that are happening within your system can be happening when we're just taking some moments to pause and either reflect with intention or cultivate attention. So that's what we're practicing.
Oh, I love that. And I was just jotting down these words of celebration, showing up, and support. These are just like circling in my mind right now. And to go all the way back to the beginning and how your practice really brought you to the work, which was just showing up and having that celebration of I showed up for myself. And then in addition, the idea of just in showing up for ourselves, then we can show up for others.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's so important.
Yeah. And I think there's something else that I want to kind of home in on there too, right? So as you say, it's showing up for ourselves and it's showing up for others. And then there's also, I think there's it sort of goes hand in hand with this like myth of multitasking. We are doing so much, right? And as people who are working from home a lot these days, people who are taking care of families at home, people who are taking care of other things outside of life and who have where our boundaries are less and less clear, there is such a need to kind of switch back and forth all the time to different things. And I have found that practicing with holding a space for something like mindfulness in transition is incredibly helpful for me to not get overwhelmed by that, because it is so easy for me to get, okay, like today I had to go really quickly run to pick up my kids from school because they got out of school early so that I could come back for this call and make sure that they were like set up in the back room so that they're not going to bother me. I hope. And then be present for this conversation. And if we don't have, again, a ground, something to like grab onto, whether it's, you know, moving from meeting to meeting, from stakeholder to stakeholder, or, you know, even moving from one policy to another, right? Having some way to transition and kind of set our intention for what's next, not only can help support us being more effective, but again, also can kind of dial down that overwhelm when we are sort of spinning with multiple things in our minds all at once. So I wanted to emphasize that because I certainly feel like that's something I struggle with more and more these days. And a lot of people we're seeing that with a lot of folks.
And I think it gets back to what you shared around being able to harness our attention and move forward with intention. And that's, I might have used it a little differently than you did, but the sentiment is the same, that, and being able to not feel like I'm juggling, you might still be juggling all the plates and all the things, but you're being able to find your ground, to use your language, find your ground. And I often say this of like, just take a breath and find your feet. Just find your feet for a second, because it helps us get out of the swirl.
Yep.
And gets us right here. And then we can choose, right? Like what's important, what's needed. Okay. And then go from there, instead of doing but this plate and this plate and what's important and this plate and this plate and what am I doing? Which I think we all find ourselves in, because we're asked to just go all the time. We're never asked, find your ground, find your feet.
Right.
Right.
Yep. Yeah.
So, and that's just really, that's very powerful. I think for anyone who's, for anyone, whether you're leading or not leading, whether you're just leading yourself or you're leading a team, a community, etc., just finding your ground, finding your space for yourself. So if you wanted, if there's one thing you would hope that a leader, any leader, would take away from our conversation today, what would you want that one thing to be?
I'm going to lean on this, something that my colleague actually said not too long ago while she was leading a practice. Again, you're worth it. And I feel, at least for me, it can be easy to hear something like that and be like, yeah, okay, I'm worth it, I guess, whatever. But then a recognition of, you are worth it because look at the space you're holding, right, as a leader for the others around you. And by doing a practice like this, by doing a short mindfulness practice or a short find your feet or even a short, journaling intention, you are recognizing and acknowledging that you're holding that space for others, and then really sinking into a practice of what that means, right? And demonstrating for them what that means. So like you say, whether it's you're, leading a city or leading a department or something along those lines, or whether you are, managing up, down, and sideways, you are leading by example toward, supporting those around you and making sure that the things that you want to accomplish get accomplished. And so this is a way of leaning in, I guess. So that's why I would practice.
I love that. And also just to highlight from that, and that in the role as a leader, you get to also shape culture, and the expectations around that, and how we are hoping one another might be able to show up. So you're also holding space for this type of practice and taking care for those around you. And sometimes we forget that. because often in the roles, I think, especially with the populations you're serving, it feels really selfish to take time for yourself. And you know you're worth it, but you know that there's greater needs, that there's such great need. Let me rephrase that. There is such great need around you. And so it's really difficult to situate yourself to say, I'm worth it, I need to do the practice. But just remembering that it's also in service to practice and do whatever it is that serves you. And right. To be able to show up for yourself, because you're also holding space in that way for other leaders and individuals around you to recognize, oh, it's okay. It's okay that I can take a moment and not have to produce something or do something in the sense of what we call doing, right? But it's just taking care.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And I will say there's just a power to silence. And I'm not saying like a lot of silence, like you don't have to be awkward about it. But even if it's, the moment that you're starting a meeting, so sometimes we can invite folks into an actual minute to arrive and taking some time. And even if you're not doing that, okay, everybody's here, we're starting the meeting, everyone's eyes are on you, let's say if you're leading the meeting, and then it's just, okay, let's begin, right? There's something about, we are rushing. There are so many things to do. There are too many things to do that any single human can do. That is a thing. That's a feature of life, I feel like, in our culture and our world. And there's something about bringing in a spaciousness, even if it's a light touch, that can be opening for yourself and for others. So I would just play with that and explore it.
I love that. And you also have left us with a practice, the moment to arrive, right? Or a minute, it can be a full minute. Yep. We practice that actually in our department, and it is powerful. Yep. And even just taking the beat, if you're like, people are not going to stay still for a minute, or they're going to say this is weird, which is fine. Let's be honest. But it's just do the beat like you did here. So I love that you've left us with, you're worth it. And here's a tiny way to hold some space for yourself and for others. That's wonderful. Lindsey, I just have to say thank you so much for taking the time to share what SIYLI is and a little bit about you and your personal practice with us all. I'm so grateful. We'll make sure that we share links. So if any of our leaders want to learn more about the program, we'll make sure we get that shared out as well. So
yay, please do. Yes, info@SIYLI. Anytime, please email us, SIYLI.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dana. This was really fun.